White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says the Biden administration's first budget request is on the way. The discretionary guide will be the first indication agency leaders have of what could be coming for fiscal 2022. David Hawkings is editor-in-chief of The Fulcrum. David, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. Jen Psaki made it sound like the White House is not crazy about the term skinny budget, as one of the members of the press corps called it. What is the discretionary guide and how to get that name?
Well, it is pretty simple. It is much less. It can quite literally be reduced to a skinny booklet rather than a big fat budget books that we're used to, or at least those of us who are used to looking at budgets as analog books. Then they went to CD-ROMs. Now they're online. But back in the day, they were big fat budget books that were churned out by the government printing office with really down to the minute detail about what the president wanted for every discretionary program, mandatory and taxes as well, but really down to some pretty narrow, pretty finely shaved meat. Not doing that anymore. Not even sure at this point, as we're talking now, Francis, whether we're even going to see the skinny budget, which would essentially just be a bare bones, here's how much you should spend at each department. Have at it, Congress, and figure it out.
What does Congress do with that, or do they just kind of look at it, say that's nice, this is a guide, and then we'll look at the budget request, or not in some cases, when it actually rolls out?
Well, I think, and I say this often when I'm on with you. It's important to remember that an enormous amount of budget work, even in times where we talk about budget standoffs and budget crises and shutdowns, impending shutdowns. There is an enormous amount of work that the administration and the congressional appropriators are doing on matters that are not seen as controversial. So the appropriations committees which are under new leadership this year. Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut, most notably, taking over the House Appropriations Committee. And of course, the Democrats are now in charge on the Senate as well again. They're at work. They're working through the things you never hear about in the headlines, but that are enormously important to agencies and programs all over the country. And all over the government. So plenty of work's happening. Obviously, in a so-called trifecta situation where you have the same party controlling OMB and the two appropriations committees, there's going to be more agreement than not. All that having been said, the political situation when it comes to other Biden administration priorities, the fact that we now may see the so-called reconciliation process, which gets around the filibuster, used for President Biden's so-called infrastructure package, that might poison the well. There are still plenty of reasons to be worried about how the budget process will play out between now and the end of September, or likely beyond, once again. But that will come down to big ticket things that are in the headlines. Many things that are not in the headlines will get handled.
You and I have been having these conversations for more than 10 years, and I pray on an ongoing basis that someday we can have one without talking about the possibility of a continuing resolution or the consequences of a CR that's already in place. Sounds like you're saying that's maybe where we're headed again this year, David.
Oh, I think it is. I think it is. I mean, yes, the appropriations committees are having hearings. Yes, they're doing this, but there is a poisonous atmosphere on the Hill that we've been, for as long as you and I have been talking. The budget process has been more broken than not. For as long as you and I have been talking, now more than a decade. The Congress has been more dysfunctional than not. Things are at a new level. Since January 6th, there is really a lot of bad blood. There's going to be a lot of anger on the Republican side if the Democrats decide to try and advance the president's next big package, this infrastructure package, without the need for getting any Republican buy-in. And meanwhile, and we've also talked about how Congress has a hard time doing more than one big thing at a time. So after this fight is over, there will be other fights, and I think that the likelihood is that normal budgeting, which would be abnormal budgeting, regular budgeting, is not what we're going to see again this year.
Yeah, what happened to regular order? It's not regular. This is regular order.
Irregular order is the regular order.
Right. We have a couple of minutes left, David. What are the markers, or what's the timeline that you will watch to see how on track or off track this process becomes?
Oh, well, you will want to see, remembering that there are filibusters in the Senate when it comes to appropriations bills. So all this talk that some in the audience may be paying attention to, because the people who watch this show pay more attention to the granular movements of policy than some others. But remember that even we had the COVID relief bill, which was done with this reconciliation process, no filibuster. Now we may have this second bill done with no filibuster under reconciliation. None of that applies to appropriations bills. Appropriations bills are what they call fully debatable. That's the euphemism for meaning the minority party can filibuster. That is likely to happen. To see if there's any prospect for normalcy, you'll want to see whether the House side at least starts churning out its dozen bills. Remember, it's supposed to be a dozen different bills. I think you probably will see that happen. They'll move. They have the majority power to move the bills one at a time. I'm going to guess that Mrs. DeLauro will try and do that, and will. I guess the real marker to see is whether the Senate even tries to do that, or whether they don't spend any time at all on their 12 bills and they just wait for some big package, which wouldn't be assembled in September. Almost certainly would be assembled after the October 1st start of the fiscal year.
David Hawkings, thanks very much. Great to have you on the program.
Thanks, Francis.